All right, we should get going with today's show. Get the lights on and start setting up the cameras, and I'll be ready soon. I'm just not quite feeling it today. I didn't have a good night. I spoke over the weekend with an old friend who said I should lose the hat, that I'm too serious. I don't know, maybe they had a point. That got me to thinking about the show. Um, Perhaps I am being too negative. Even the name of the show, a lot of people say we should change the name. Turns people off. RNL, the Revolution Nothing Less show. Really? Nothing less? There's nothing else? I'm just looking at the notes for today's show. A couple weeks ago, I carried on in an episode, and I got all worked up about Bob Avakian's declaration that we have just two choices: either live with all of this or make revolution. And I said there aren't three choices, there aren't four choices, there's not even 100 choices. But is this making us a lot of friends, Pete? I don't know. A lot of people think there are other choices. Important people think this, actually. Important people. I was reading the New York Times earlier this week, and their distinguished columnist, Thomas Friedman, this guy offers advice to very powerful people, and a lot of people listen to him. And I thought at the beginning of this that he's echoing Bob Avakian. He says this. He says, quote, "I hoped that once Joe Biden took charge, my anxiety over how close we came to losing our democracy would soon fade." And then he said, it hasn't. We have the fight of our lives on our hands, and I felt good about this because we've said, we've only bought some time, and there's not much time. But then it turned out he didn't agree with us. His answer was, we have to unleash capitalism. And he said we need smart capitalism. So I kind of got bummed out all over again and thought, well, man, maybe we're just too hard on capitalism. And then I said, you know what? That's the mainstream bourgeois media. But then I read an interview on the internet again. And this is one of the most famous radical voices of our time, Noam Chomsky, a great linguist, very famous linguist, and he's an exposer of U.S. imperialism. He's even an anarchist. And he was asked, what is your assessment of Joe Biden and what he's doing, his actions? And Noam Chomsky said, better than anticipated, considerably so, an impressive achievement. And then he added, yes, that people should pressure Biden to do what Biden is saying he's going to do. So I began thinking again, are we just being too negative? Are we turning people off? After all, a lot of good people are going to be relieved, even if Chomsky, who has over the years made some very important contribution, feels encouraged by what's going on now. Well, then are we just pitching sour grapes here on the RNL show, saying things are going to feel different under Biden and Harris, but that if they try to unite the country, the way they're going to try to unite the country is something that no decent person should want to be a part of? And that's kind of hard. Maybe we could be a little looser on this. Aren't we going against the grain too much? If we keep this up, we're going to have to struggle with people. Like the future depends on it. And this got me wondering about our brand. Revolution, nothing less. Maybe we should have a brand that's a little less harsh. What do you think, Pete? A little less harsh. Good idea? No, he doesn't seem to be too happy about that. Maybe, though, it could be more of a revolution of the mind. We should encourage people to not let the news and the horrors of the world get them down, be so upset, be so angry. Take care of themselves. Give the Democrats a chance and let's see what they do. And, people say to us all the time, I got to take care of business. And not only that, man, I hear what you're saying, but I'm too fucked up and these fools out here are too fucked up to do what you guys are talking about. So I got to take care of me and let the world be. So I keep looking at my social media, and everything here is about the trial of George Floyd. Not of George Floyd, he was killed, but of the cop who killed him. And, I'm thinking, we're so definitive about this. Maybe we should just wait and see and let the courts have their say. And, this police officer's lawyer, maybe he had a point. I got a feeling he spoke to some people. First off, the police officers do have a hard job. They have to make split-second decisions, even if it takes them 9.5 minutes to make their decision. he spoke for a lot of people when he scolded this martial arts instructor who got very angry at seeing what he thought was a murder. So I got to thinking about this. Maybe people should be a little more civil, a little calmer. And maybe on this show, we need to be a little more even-handed. A lot of things that we show on this show trigger people. They see all this violence by the police against people. They see the environment being destroyed. They hear about women being murdered. Maybe we should just tone it down a bit. And who am I to go tell black people that their right to vote is being taken away from them, that they should take to the streets? Can't people have some safe space?
What the hell, Andy? Stop wallowing in your bullshit. What kind of fool are you playing?
Noche Diaz! Noche Diaz, a leader of the Revolution Club. Dude, I'm playing the April Fool. It's April 1st, and this is the RNL Revolution Nothing Less show. This is episode 46, and it is the Revolution Nothing Less show, and we fucking mean it.
That's right.
Okay, good. So, today's show is 1 month before May 1st, International Revolutionary May 1st. We're getting ready for that. And this is a show about revolution. There is no safe space. The world is a horror, and there is a way out of the madness, and there is an extraordinary leadership for this in Bob Avakian, and he's absolutely right that there's only two choices: live with all this horror or make revolution to overthrow this system, to abolish it from the face of the earth, and to bring it down and overthrow it, all this kind of stuff that we talk about, every word that makes you angry and that makes our blood boil. This is what we're doing because we could bring into being a far better and radically different world through this revolution based on what Bob Avakian has brought forward, the new communism. So, Noche, you're here to talk about International Revolutionary May 1st. Let's go for it.
That's right. So look, we got to do that, what you were just saying. And this May 1st, the Revolution Club is calling on people everywhere to gather in public places and parks and celebrate this international revolutionary holiday, declaring we are human beings. We refuse to accept slavery in any form, and putting out to the whole world what Bob Avakian says when he says we have those two choices: live with all this and condemn future generations to suffer the same or worse if they have a future at all, or make revolution. And it's time to get organized for that revolution. So get with the revolution clubs. And this is not just a day where I want to see people having a good time on that Saturday in 4 weeks and 2 days. We're starting now to step out with this message, because let's not forget, this year started off ugly. First week, you see a violent attempt at a coup by thousands and thousands of fascists, and the main instigator of that attempted coup, Donald Trump, not even punished. An impeachment that basically absolved him of all guilt. Okay, showing you what it's going to mean that we continue to live under this system in this country, and then we're supposed to come together and reconcile with that other half of that country that you saw on full display with all its ugly white supremacy.
74 million people voted for him.
That's right. And in the last few weeks, we've seen waves of violence targeting women, and especially Asian women. And this is especially painful to see shortly after International Women's Day, where we saw something beautiful around the world pouring into the streets in places like Mexico City and Iran and Myanmar, and in other places where, you know, women were standing up and demanding an end to all oppression and an end to the chains that bind women. But we still live in a world of male domination, okay? We can go on, and the show will continue to go on. But the fact is, this year also began with something else, which was this statement from Bob Avakian. And we in the Revolution Clubs are setting out this year to make advances in bringing forward the thousands of people who are going to work with BA following his leadership to make that revolution, to make serious advances now, because the time that was bought can't be squandered, like you were saying, and we have to put it to good use. And that's what we're starting in a serious way with a national coordinated effort with these revolutionary celebrations this May 1st.
Okay, so I want to back up, though, to some of that April Fool's parody, because we do need to struggle with people. And the reason we struggle with people is because people can change. What we have going for us and what we do bring to you is the reality that objectively exists. And because we are talking about the world as it actually is, that can resonate with people. But people look at it in the way that they've been molded and directed by the institutions of this society, from the politicians to the media to the pulpits to the culture and all of this. So we're going up against all that. But what we're bringing to people is a whole way to look at the world that corresponds to the way the world not only actually is, but how it could be through an actual revolution. And so we have a deep belief that people can change. And that's a big part of what we're doing with the revolution clubs, what we're doing out in society, and preparing for the time when bringing forward. Right now, we're trying to bring forward a section of people who can lead a larger section of people, and preparing for the time when they can lead millions in an actual revolution. But just coming back to this point that people can change, I do want to say one thing about my opening parody, in particular about Noam Chomsky, who I and we consider as an ally in the struggle against U.S. imperialism. The comments that I was criticizing that he made about Biden's, his euphoria around Biden was restricted to, and Chomsky's remarks were restricted to Biden's domestic agenda. And he has continued to expose what Biden is doing internationally. And I hope that as things develop and as we and others struggle over what actually is the solution to this, that Noam will continue to play an important role in the world. But I think we should get back, Noche, to you referenced the talk by Bob Avakian, the New Year's message that he gave. A new year, the urgent need for a radically new world, for the emancipation of all humanity. And this is very important at this time. And I, sir, am going to fix my hat, even though I took the advice earlier to take it off and then put it on in a sloppy way.
Good to have you back.
All right.
So yes, this New Year's message that came out from Bob Avakian, very important. I mean, what you were just saying about how, yes, people can change and we can change the world, but we have to understand it in order to be able to do that. And that's what this statement does. Very, with a lot of breadth, depth, heart, and there's an analysis to understand, and also a call for actually going to work to bring about something new this year that's putting out the possibility and the program and road forward for this radically different world. So this is what we are, starting to break out with in a big way. And look, people still need to be, responsible with the, COVID and pandemic, and not taking, being irresponsible and being unscientific. But the reason we need to go out and struggle with people, especially people who have a better side to them, over things like, how to understand what we're facing, is because not only can we change the world, but we urgently need to. Again, going back to the new title of that New Year's statement, the urgent need for a radically different world, for the emancipation of all humanity. There's not a whole lot of time. Things are not going in a good direction fundamentally for the future of humanity. But it can't, and that's what we have, and what is concentrated in Bob Avakian's leadership, in the person, which you've been illustrating very powerfully on this show, Bob Avakian for the Liberation of Black People and the Emancipation of All Humanity has been a series that's we've been able to show on the streets a bit, and introduce people to who this person is, his history, and importance, and bringing to life that, again, there's a real world out there. These ideas don't just float in people's heads, and this is interesting, you might hopefully like this, and maybe you'll like that. Okay, this is about how do we understand why humanity is suffering so unnecessarily, and how we can actually change that. And people need to know about this leadership, but also they need to know how and that they can and need to get with it now. And that's what we need to start, really making leaps in these next 4 weeks and 2 days leading into May 1st, and then demonstrating and having impact on the day to actually, create openings for even further advance in this revolution.
So I just want to add one more point about Bob Avakian, BA, and that we go out there straight up with people, that we have this leader and this leadership. And I just want to say that I think this is an extremely positive factor for the reasons you said. But the fact is that what we are up against with this system is just enormous. And the fact that we have a leader of this integrity who has developed a strategy to actually make a revolution, who's written a constitution for a new socialist republic, what it would actually be like, how we could change the world on day one and continue to change the world after the revolution. That you have leadership like this, who's got his roots in the 1960s. This is a positive factor. This isn't a negative thing. In fact, when you get out among the people who really want revolution the most, and they find out that there is this leadership, they want to know about it. Then then the struggle is on. Is this the leadership they're going to follow? And that's why we insist on this show all the time that we follow BA, and you should too. So before we close out this segment on May 1st, I just want you to make it a little more concrete on how can people get organized into the movement for an actual revolution.
That's right. First of all, one, connect up in every way you can on the social media platforms, whichever ones you're on. You can find us at the RevComs. You can find revolution clubs at in different cities up in the description of this video. Two, you can write to us, either DM on social media or by emailing us on the email that's on the screen or in the description right now. Three, go to revcom.us, okay, and follow the website, but also very concretely for this effort, we're focusing up on what we're calling seeds. This is going to be taking selections from Bob Avakian's New Year's message. Some key points of it that need to get out to popularize what's in there, the substance, the existence of this statement, and to drive people into the full thing itself. This should be getting out together with the information about what we're building towards on May 1st, together with the 526, with the basic principles and points of attention that involve people in getting organized into revolution clubs. And finally, organize collective viewings either on social media, on Zoom, or together in open spaces in real life in ways that can be done safely to watch the Revolution Nothing Less show together every Thursday for the next, actually 4.5 weeks and beyond, because this is a key part of where you're going to get more on how we're working together throughout the country to organize for revolution. And again, write us not just to find out what you can do, but to share ideas as well as how we're going to actually be taking full advantage of every day between now and May 1st and beyond.
That's very important that people watch the Revolution Nothing Less show. As long as we can be on the air and streaming for you, we are going to be here until we make a revolution. And that's not going to be as long in the future as you may think. We're getting organized now, and the conditions are sharpening up in society. So look, in the parody, I put out a lot of BS around this trial of the pig Derek Chauvin, who murdered George Floyd, that everybody saw that it even lasted longer than we've been saying. And we're going to begin getting into this today. We have a whole segment, a discussion I had with the radical attorney from Philadelphia, Michael Coard. And we want to, though, set the stage for this with a short video from Bob Avakian that we call, "Why is Police Terror Necessary for This System?"
Why is this terror and murder necessary for this system in order to ensure its order and its ongoing functioning? The answer is that from the beginning of this country, white supremacy has been poured into the foundation and built into the institutions and the ongoing functioning of this system. Specifically with regard to Black people, the centuries of oppression they have suffered, from slavery days to the days of Jim Crow segregation and Ku Klux Klan terror, to the present time with the continuing systematic discrimination against Black people in every part of society, employment, housing, education, healthcare, and on and on. All this has resulted in a situation where masses of Black people today, and in particular youth, have been robbed of a means for a decent life, with many maintained in conditions of desperate poverty and deprivation. This, again, is not simply because those who are in the seats of power and deciding government policy are racist, though that is true of most of them. It is fundamentally because of the nature of the system itself and the historically evolved requirements and dynamics of this system of capitalism imperialism. Now that is a big mouthful. The nature of the system itself and the historically evolved requirements and dynamics of this system of capitalism imperialism. So let's break it down. This country was founded on the enslavement of masses of African people, as well as the genocidal subjugation of Native Americans and theft of their land. And its further development involved the conquest of huge parts of Mexico, reducing people of Mexican origin to second-class status as well. This required the propagation of racism to justify all the horrific oppression. Then, when the Civil War broke out over the question of slavery, and even when slavery was abolished as a result of that Civil War, given that white supremacy had been and remained such a crucial part of the glue holding the country together, the only way to put it back together on the foundation of the capitalist system was to once again forcefully assert white supremacy. That is why, very soon after the end of the Civil War, Black people were subjected to the system of Jim Crow segregation, backed up by systematic terror punctuated by repeated lynchings, while the genocidal aggression against and theft of the land of Native Americans was stepped up, and immigrants from Mexico were subjected to ongoing discrimination and violence by the enforcers of this system.
That was an excerpt from Bob Avakian's piece, Racial Oppression Can Be Ended, but Not Under This System, read by Bob Avakian. You can find the whole article at revcom.us or on the podcast on our channel here on the RevCom's YouTube channel called Emancipate Humanity with Bob Avakian. Now, we're going to be covering, as we promised, the trial of Derek Chauvin, the cop who killed George Floyd. And every day as this trial is going forward, I've thought back to something that Bob Avakian said in a speech in 2003. He made the point that even all these long years after slavery and Jim Crow and all the struggle that Black people have waged, every Black person in America lives under an active death sentence. It may or may not be carried out, but it always could be, and often at the hands of law enforcement. This is what we saw concentrated in the murder of George Floyd. And it is what we're all experiencing again through the powerful and very emotional and moving witness testimony in these first days of this trial, where people are reliving and recounting what they witnessed on the street when they saw Chauvin murder George Floyd, and they cried out to stop this public lynching. And in fact, this truth that Bob Avakian spoke in 2003 was given voice almost exactly in the words of one of these witnesses, the 17-year-old, or the young woman who was 17 at the time of this murder of George Floyd, who caught the whole thing on video. It's the video that went viral. Darnella Frazier, she said on the stand, "When I look at George Floyd, I look at my dad. I look at my brothers. I look at my cousins, my uncles, because they are all Black. I look at how it could have been one of them." Now multiply that times millions. This is the reality in America today, and this is why millions and millions across this country rose up so powerfully against this lynching when it took place. In the most powerful outpouring of rebellion and mass protest seen in this country in generations. Now the power of these protests points to something else that Bob Avakian has emphasized, which is not only the necessity for revolution, but the possibility of revolution. Including that this question, the oppression of Black people, is one of the most explosive and potentially powerful forces, the struggle against this, to make a revolution. If and as the sentiments that have given rise to these outpourings get transformed into revolutionary understanding and revolutionary organization, into a movement of people that are serious with the strategy and the leadership to bring this system down, to get rid of the source of this oppression. This is why the most important thing that can come through this struggle is for more and more people to encounter, engage with, and take up the leadership, the scientific leadership that Bob Avakian has forged to understanding the source of this and the solution. In revolution, nothing less. At the same time, the stakes of this trial itself are very high for society and for the struggle for revolution. So we're going to, in our next segment, bring you a very rich conversation that took place between Andy Zee and the lawyer and law professor and writer Michael Coard from Philadelphia about this trial of Derek Chauvin, about how to understand it, about what's at stake, about some of the laws that are shaping this, that are playing out in the courtroom. So that's going to be our next segment. I'm here with Andy. I think you want to say a few things about this before we start play the interview.
Yeah, well, Michael and I had a extensive conversation, and we're going to show you a part of the conversation. We spoke. Michael's a radical black people's lawyer in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, teaches at Drexel, and we spoke about the whole history of the oppression of black people from the Middle Passage in 1619 down to today, and how that got expressed in the law. But what we're going to share with you is Michael speaking specifically on a few examples of where white supremacy and the role of the police are written into the law and how that was shaped. And this should help you understand what you watch in the case. And it is important that our audience be watching this and following this in various venues. It's broadcast every day live, and it's being reported on. And then after this, we got into some back and forth on the reality that given the racist nature of law and the role of the police in America, why it seems that the fix is in against justice for the people, including that it often is, but that it is actually more accurate to recognize that while the legal system is stacked against us, there is the basis to fight and win in the courts, and how in political trials the outcome can be greatly influenced by the struggle of the people in the streets fighting for justice. So let's go to the interview, or really it's a conversation now. Okay, I'm happy to have Michael Coard back on the Revolution Nothing Less show. Michael, as we said before, is an attorney in Philadelphia, a people's attorney. And Michael, speaking for myself and the whole crew here, we're very happy that you came back on the show today.
I'm happy to be here. Thank you, Andy.
Great. So we hope that, I'm sure you can help our viewers understand more deeply what it is they're going to be seeing and hearing in this trial of the cop Derek Chauvin, who sat on George Floyd's neck for 9 minutes and 29 seconds, several minutes of which he was unconscious. But I want to start our conversation off by letting the lead assistant district attorney, the lead prosecutor, which means that this is the lawyer for the government whose job it is in a trial like this to try and convict the cop Derek Chauvin. And I think many of our viewers know, but some probably don't, that normally the job of the prosecutor is to work completely together with the police to get a conviction against the people and send people away for very long bids. So this is a bit of a twist on that, and it is actually, we'll talk about this, rare even for a policeman to be prosecuted, let alone convicted. And we're going to get into some of why that is so. So we'll come back to all of this, but first I want our viewers to see and hear how the lead prosecutor to go after Derek Chauvin opened up this trial.
You will learn that on May 25th of 2020, Mr. Derek Chauvin betrayed this badge when he used excessive and unreasonable force upon the body of Mr. George Floyd. That he put his knees upon his neck and his back, grinding and crushing him until the very breath, no, ladies and gentlemen, until the very life was squeezed out of him. You will learn that he was well aware that Mr. Floyd was unarmed, that Mr. Floyd had not threatened anyone, that Mr. Floyd was in handcuffs, he was completely in the control of the police, he was defenseless. You will learn what happened in that 9 minutes and 29 seconds. The most important numbers you will hear in this trial are 929. What happened in those 9 minutes and 29 seconds when Mr. Derek Chauvin was applying this excessive force to the body of Mr. George Floyd. We have two objectives in this trial, ladies and gentlemen. The first objective is to give Mr. Chauvin a fair trial. Mr. Chauvin has a presumption of innocence. He is presumed to be innocent until proven guilty. We plan to prove to you, beyond a reasonable doubt, that Mr. Chauvin was anything other than innocent on May 25th of 2020. And our second objective, ladies and gentlemen, is to bring you the evidence, which I'm trying to preview this morning. We are bringing this case, this prosecution against Mr. Chauvin, for the excessive force that he applied onto the body of Mr. George Floyd, for engaging in behavior that was imminently dangerous, in the force that he applied without regard for its impact on the life of Mr. George Floyd. So let's begin by focusing then on what we will learn about this 9 minutes and 29 seconds. And you will be able to hear Mr. Floyd saying, "Please, I can't breathe. Please, man, please." In this 9 minutes and 29 seconds, you will see that as Mr. Floyd is handcuffed there on the ground, he is verbalizing 27 times, you will hear, in the 4 minutes and 45 seconds, "I can't breathe. Please, I can't breathe." You will see that Mr. Chauvin is kneeling on Mr. Floyd's neck and back. He has one knee on his neck, and the knee on his back is intermittently off and on his back, as you'll be able to see for yourself in the video footage. You will hear Mr. Floyd as he's crying out. You hear him at some point cry out for his mother when he's being squeezed there. It's very close to his mother, you will learn. You will hear him say, "Tell my kids I love them." You will hear him say, about his fear of dying, he says, "I'll probably die this way. I'm through. They're going to kill me. They're going to kill me, man." You will hear him crying out, and you will hear him cry out in pain. "My stomach hurts. My neck hurts. Everything hurts." You will hear that for yourself. "Please, I can't breathe. Please, your knee on my neck." You will hear it, and you'll see at the same time while he's crying out, Mr. Chauvin never moves. The knee remains on his neck, sunglasses remain undisturbed on his head, and it just goes on. You will hear his final words when he says, "I can't breathe." Before that time, you'll hear his voice get heavier. You will hear his words further apart. You will see that his respiration gets shallower and shallower and finally stops when he speaks his last words, "I can't breathe." And once we have his final words, you'll see that for roughly 53 seconds, he is completely silent and virtually motionless with just sporadic movements. You're going to learn those sporadic movements matter greatly in this case because what they reflect. Mr. Floyd was no longer breathing when he's making these movements.
So that was Jerry Blackwell, the lead assistant DA prosecutor in this trial of the cop who murdered George Floyd. See, I'm being polite. I was going to say the pig, but I'm going to say the cop, Derek Chauvin. This has come to concentrate a great deal. And, you know, Eric Nelson asked the jury to look at the totality of the evidence and not any outside factors before making their decision. And in something that tells you just how concerned they are and what they want to exclude from this jury, he said, there is no political or social cause in this trial, in this courtroom, rather, was his exact words. So, well, yes, there is. But, Michael, I'd like you to begin by talking about the reality that every year hundreds of people are killed by the police, many of whom are innocent, disproportionately black and brown. How specifically has the law been written and shaped over time so that we get this result of justifiable homicide over and over and over again when cops are even brought to trial?
Andy, that's a great question. And I'm here in my home radio studio. I do a radio show in Philly, and I always keep my Malcolm poster next to me because anytime I talk about the law, I remember Brother Malcolm, who used to say, "Make it plain." So I'm not going to give this convoluted, esoteric legal analysis. I'm going to make it plain. That's the first thing. Second thing, I always tell people that although I passed the bar exam 26 years ago, I am not a lawyer who happens to be a black man. I'm a black man who just happens to be a lawyer. So for me, I decided that based on the fact that I love to talk and love to write and love to argue, that the best way to revolution for me is to be a soldier behind enemy lines and become a lawyer. So that's why, having said that, you pose a great question. Let's fast forward to 1857 Dred Scott, which clearly stated that Blacks have no rights that whites are bound to respect. And then fast forward to 2016. In 2016, the Solicitor General of the state of Kansas cited the 1850 Dred Scott decision in his legal brief. In 2016, the top lawyer in the state of Kansas cited the Dred Scott decision. So when we talk about these rules I mentioned, that's what it's all about. That's why we get no justice for Rodney King, despite what we saw with that videotape. That's why we get no justice for Emmett Till, for Trayvon Martin, for Eric Gardner, for Michael Brown, for all of these folks, because the fix is in. The system is rigged. And very quickly, Andy, you asked about how do they do this? It's pretty much, and I don't want to confuse civil law with criminal law, but it comes together here because there are two civil cases. There's a case from 1985 and there's a case from 1989. The 1985 case is the Texas versus Garner case. Was a case, a horrible case. 15-year-old kid running from the cops, climbs up on a fence, cop shoots him in the back of the head. I mean, that's the horrific killing, unarmed. Well, in that case, what the Supreme Court ruled is basically this. If a cop feels in his or her mind that you pose a threat based on what the cop thinks, then the is justified. Fast forward from that 1985 case to the 1989 case. That's the Graham versus Connor case. Similar kind of setup. Guy goes into a store to buy something, changes his mind, runs out. A cop sees him, chases him, beats the slap out of him. He files a lawsuit. And the court basically said the same thing. Comes down to this. As long as a cop says, and cops are trained to do this at the police academy, I was in fear for my safety, or stop resisting. Once they say that, whether they were really in fear or whether or not you were resisting is no longer the point. It's what's in their head. So if they come to court and make the argument that they were in fear of their safety, they thought you were resisting, they get away with murder. And the thing I love about the criminal justice system as a criminal defense lawyer is also what I hate about it. Guilty verdicts in criminal cases have to be unanimous. So the prosecutor in this case got to get all 12 of those jurors. Only one has to say not guilty. Only one has to say not guilty. So people might think that that defense attorney is making stupid arguments, but when we go in as lawyers, we know the breakdown. With 12 jurors, usually 4 the defense likes, 4 the prosecution likes, 4 that can go either way. As a defense attorney, I just need one of those 12. So the fix is in.
So here we're going to jump ahead to Michael Coard discussing the legal arguments defending Derek Chauvin. And then from there, we go into a discussion of how to understand the fact that the courts are stacked against the people, but the role that the people can play, and whether or not the fix is totally in, or there's any freedom for the people's struggle and for the struggle in the courtroom to influence the outcome of this trial, and why it matters.
Now, here's the thing that the attorney for Chauvin has argued. It's a two-pronged approach in terms of defenses, but it's really one. It's two-pronged from a legal standpoint, but it's one approach from a political. The two-pronged from the legal standpoint is that the cop's not guilty because he did what he was trained to do. Well, that would be a good argument if it were factually true. I've seen retired police commissioners on national news who say that's garbage, that we have never, commissioners from the north to east, southwest, they all say that that's not true. No police officer in the history of this country has ever been trained to hold somebody down by the neck for 9 minutes. So that was the first argument. He's not guilty because he did what he was trained to do. What's the second legal argument? Second legal argument is that even if he did this thing was not the cause of death. The cause of death was, as the attorney argued in his opening statement, was heart arrhythmia resulting from drug addiction. Well, that's still stupid in and of itself, because what are you telling me, that if the cops hadn't bothered George Floyd that day, that at that exact moment he would have dropped dead? Of course not. So those are the two legal arguments, but you can see how superficial, how nonsensical they are. So what was the real deal? The real deal is something completely different. I need to get one of those 12 jurors to feel my pain as a white man. So that's what he's talking about how short. And I think they said he's 5'9", 140-pound Chauvin. And then they talked about this big monster, 6'3", 200 pounds, George Floyd. So it's a two-pronged legal approach that's just talk. But the real deal is white folks on the jury or confused black folks on the jury. Hey, let this cop go.
Well, I think that's important. So that's, for people to understand that it does matter then to discredit those arguments. But the more important thing is to actually that this gets exposed in the courtroom as a fallacy, as a contradiction to the law. But it does also depend on what the people have done already and what they still do need to do. See, this is the point. It's okay, there's a dozen people or 24 people outside the courtroom. I hope as this trial goes on that more and more people are coming out into the streets in different cities around the country, because this is where, there's the price that gets paid in the narrow sense by Derek Chauvin, the Minneapolis Police Department. But there's the larger price that is actually why we even have this trial being broadcast on national TV, because this is a national issue. In response to the beautiful uprising after the murder of George Floyd, we saw first an urban rebellion. We saw a police station that went up in flames, followed by one of the most massive protests in U.S. history. This is something that has all sections of the ruling class frightened. But then Donald Trump said, wait a second, this is all Antifa. This is not the people. And he tried to do run his whole campaign on this. So there's tremendous necessity on the people who are in power now to try and at least give some limited amount of justice, or maybe even more justice than that. So there actually is a struggle here that's going on that really matters. A total acquittal here would be a terrible thing, because it would, besides validating an unbelievably racist murder, it also would be demoralizing to large sections of people. And possibly it would inspire others to struggle.
And I'm glad you mentioned that, Andy. And I don't want people to confuse, or I should say, I don't want to confuse people by making them think I'm saying that the fix is in, the system is rigged, and we just throw up our hands, there's nothing we can do. No, I'm saying the fix is in, the system is rigged, and that's why we must do something. And it's a wrong approach for me.
I'm down with that.
The first thing is get on the juries, get on these goddamn juries. But my thing is this: in addition to getting on juries, people got to get in the streets. Mumia is alive today because good lawyers did their thing in courtrooms, but no disrespect to them, great lawyers, but it's really because the people were raising hell on the streets. If
That's right.
People raise hell on the streets, we can get revolution without the lawyers. But the lawyers in the courtroom are never going to get revolution alone. So the lawyers need the masses, but the masses don't need the lawyers. The lawyers help, but the lawyers are not essential. So I want to be clear, folks, forget everything else I said. Remember this: get on juries, but mostly get in the streets.
Okay, well, what I want to say to the people who are watching this, that we'll see, but we also need to act. I want to thank you for being on the Revolution Nothing Less show, and we'll be in touch. So thank you for being with us.
Thank you, and keep the great work. You all are doing some great work. I really mean that.
Okay. Take care now, Michael.
All right.
All right.
All right, Andy, I want to thank you for that conversation with Michael Coard. I think you guys gave us some tools to be keeping in mind as we watch this trial. It's going to be very important that we follow it as it develops.
Yeah, I think one of the key points of doing this segment, this conversation with Michael, was so that people here follow the trial and see what's going on. What happens in this courtroom really is going to matter. This is a concentration. The trial and what happens on the streets in relationship to the trial is a concentration of a seminal, a key moment in U.S. history. The murder of George Floyd, 9 minutes, 29 seconds, that sparked a rebellion and one of the largest mass protests in U.S. history. And that in itself concentrated the whole history of the oppression of Black people in this country. And we cannot let this go without a justice being done. So with that, we should move on to the next segment. We'll be following this trial closely over the next couple of weeks, as long as the trial goes on. But let's get into the next segment.
Yeah, so we have two final things that we want to share with you today. One is the signing of a bill in Georgia, and quite a bit concentrated, restricting voting rights there. So we had a piece that one of the members of our crew wrote, a script describing what happened there. We're going to read it and share it with you, and then we have one other piece right after that. Andy?
Yeah, okay, so we're going to take turns reading this short thing, and understand that this is only one of over 250 bills that are before state legislators to restrict the voting rights of Black and Brown and Native American people. On March 25th, Georgia Governor Kemp signed a draconian bill to restrict voting rights. This new law allows for the state legislators to effectively take over an election they don't like. It drastically restricts mail-in voting, thus ensuring that today's hours-long voting lines in Black and Brown precincts will be even longer. And then it makes it a crime to distribute food or water to people waiting on those lines. Kemp signed this bill in the presence of only white men. And when a Black woman, state legislator, had the audacity to knock on Kemp's office door so she could bear witness to the criminal activity within, she was arrested and dragged away by a gang of cops and charged with a felony.
But what was the painting hanging behind Kemp as he sat at his desk to sign this bill? Hanging very prominently right behind him.
It was a romanticized depiction of the Callaway slave plantation, on which at least 100 Black people were forced to labor in a county where runaway slaves were hunted with hounds. This picture is appealing to those who think that the times of outright slavery and then open Jim Crow discrimination and terror were the good old days.
Now, the columnist Will Bunch, who writes for the Philadelphia Inquirer, wrote an important piece on this, and we're going to quote from it. He wrote in part, "The portrait of the plantation was the starkest reminder of Georgia's history of white racism that spans slavery, Jim Crow segregation, the rebirth of the modern Ku Klux Klan, and today's voter purges targeting Black and Brown voters." He goes on to say, "The Callaway plantation is a monument to Georgia's history of brutal white supremacy that unfortunately did not disappear when enslaved people were emancipated in 1865.
And his article continues, in 2021, it's tempting to call Kemp signing the bill in front of a plantation painting ironic, when in fact, it's all too fitting. Understanding the symbolism here helps us understand what's really important, that the voting law is the latest cruel iron link in an unbroken chain of white supremacy that extends all the way back to 1619, when the first slave ship arrived on North American soil.
All right, so with that, we're getting very close to the end of our episode tonight. Before we send you off and leave you with our final segment, I want to remind you to get involved in plans for Revolutionary May Day. Look in the description for ways to connect. And Andy, anything you want to say before we close out?
So in looking forward to International Revolutionary May 1st, and we say, we are human beings. We refuse to accept slavery in any form. That's a tremendously important and beautiful sentiment. And, you know, I began this show with an April Fool's message where I talked about negativity. The slavery that this system puts humanity through is very negative. But people standing up, the oppressed and people who desire justice, and saying that we're human beings and we refuse to accept this is a beautiful thing. And it's something that's really filled with joy, and that is the movement that we are building. Yes, we're angry, and yes, we have joy at the possibility of fighting for a future. And so with that, watch this last segment, and we will see you next week.
For the past several months, countless numbers of people from many countries, especially Central American countries like Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, have been crossing Mexico and trying to apply for asylum in the U.S. The deadly perils of that journey were written in blood on March 20th, when a 9-year-old Mexican girl died on an island in the Rio Grande near Eagle Pass, Texas, as she, her mother, and her 3-year-old brother tried to cross the river to the U.S. side. Multiply that by thousands and tens of thousands of people forced to leave their countries to trek across the border, risking death or being forced to go back where they came from, like Javier Leiva, a 30-year-old immigrant from Honduras who paid smugglers $6,000, his life savings, to take him and his 6-year-old daughter across Mexico to the U.S. He planned to apply for asylum in Brownsville, Texas, the easternmost city on the border. But on March 16, Javier was denied asylum. Authorities put Javier, his daughter, and several dozen other asylum seekers on a plane and flew them to El Paso, the westernmost Texas city 800 miles away. When they landed, all these people, including children and toddlers, were promptly put on a bus and driven across the Rio Grande to the Mexican city of Ciudad Juarez. As he stared toward El Paso's downtown, Leiva told a reporter he didn't know where he was and what he was going to do. Quote, "They didn't tell us anything. They just dropped us off here." End quote. Stories like these are not just intolerable and outrageous. It is completely needless. All this comes from, and is a big problem for, this system of capitalism imperialism. Tens of thousands of people in Central America, South America, North Africa, the Mediterranean are forced to flee because of the workings of this system and cannot be solved within this system. So we want to bring you a brief clip of Bob Avakian from his 2003 talk, Revolution, Why It's Necessary, Why It's Possible, What It's All About, which speaks sharply to the situation today at the US-Mexico border. And this is going to be followed by a beautiful song performed by the band Outernational, featuring Bob Avakian, that brings to life the unnecessary conditions that immigrants crossing the border are forced to live under in this land of broken dreams.
Now I can just hear these reactionary fools saying, "Well, Bob, answer this. If this country is so terrible, why do people come here from all over the world? Why are so many people trying to get in, not to get out?" Maybe we can imagine someone like Vice President Dick Cheney, that crooked-mouthed monster and worldwide mass murderer. Maybe we can imagine him saying something like this. "Yes, Bob, why is that?" Why? I'll tell you why. Because you have fucked up the rest of the world even worse than what you have done in this country. You have made it impossible for many people to live in their own countries as part of gaining your riches and power. There's a land, so I've been told. Every street is paved with gold, and it's just across the borderline. And when it's time to take your turn, Here's a lesson you must learn. You will lose more than you'll ever hope to find. And when you reach the broken promised land, every dream slips through your hand, and you'll know it's too late to change your mind. 'Cause you paid the price to come this far, just to wind up where you are, and you still just across the borderline.
Up and down the Rio Grande, 1,000 footprints in the sand reveal a secret no one can define. The river flows on like a bridge between our life and death. Now tell me who will cross the borderline.
And when you reach the broken promised land, every dream slips through your hand, and you know it's too late to change your mind. 'Cause you paid the price to come this far, just to wind up where you are, and you still just across the border.